And we're good. We're good to go. All right, awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is Franco Aurelio. I'm here with Keith. You might have seen a few of his testimonies on YouTube. Very awesome guy. Keith, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Well, hey, my name's Keith Nestor. I'm thankful to be here with you, and I'm very excited to have a chance to talk to you guys. I live in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I'm a former Protestant pastor, youth pastor, all kinds of different things in churches I've been doing for about 22 years before I became Catholic in 2017. I'm married. I have 3 adult children, and just super pumped. I make videos on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel called Keith Nestor, and also a Rosary channel called Rosary Crew with Keith Nestor. I have 2 podcasts. I got all kinds of stuff. I've written a couple books. So go to my website if you want to learn more about me. It's down2earthministry.org, down the number 2earthministry.org.
Awesome. Yeah, I love to hear it. See, we got high energy Catholics. We're highly efficient.
That's right.
You already know what we're doing.
That's right.
That's awesome. I love to hear that. But anyways, for today, I will have to fess up to this. I was supposed to do a questionnaire earlier in the week to see what you guys were asking questions of. So I just posted it today. So right now, but we did have some fun of some original things me and Keith wanted to talk about. So we're going to start with that as the questions keep dropping in on the Instagram chat. But right now, I kind of just want to talk about social teachings first off with Keith, pretty much just Catholic social teachings. I mean, like there's a lot of I would say in the US there's a lot of Catholics, I would say, that are mainly just cultural Catholics. They don't really know too much about the faith, how Catholics should respond to society and stuff like that, especially with all the kind of heated stuff regarding gender and the politics and all this stuff, voting Republican, Democrat, all this stuff, right? So Keith, how do you think Catholics should approach all like the wild stuff going on like politically, with the Catholic social teaching right now?
Well, I think so. Catholic social teaching, I think, is really a little. It's kind of an interesting term because a lot of social teaching is going to change with the times. But with Catholicism, our faith is rooted in a positive faith that doesn't change. Now, that doesn't mean that different approaches aren't tweaked here and there, but the core of our faith and the values that we have are things that are going to be unchanging. So Catholicism doesn't change with the times. And you see this whereas other Christian groups have changed, things like contraception, for example. Every Christian group was opposed to contraception until not that long ago, like 100 years ago. And then when the Anglican Church embraced it, then it was like dominoes, one by one, boom, boom, boom. All these other different groups started saying, well, I guess we got to get with the times for our social teaching. But Catholicism remains steadfast. You could say the same thing when it comes to marriage and human sexuality, things like that. The Catholic Church's social teaching isn't meant to be a reaction to what's going on in the culture. It's meant to shine a light on the truth in the midst of a culture that needs the teaching of the church. So where we get wrong and where we get off base is when we start with what the society is believing and we try to somehow fit the church culture and the church social teachings around that. Whereas instead, we need to be countercultural while at the same time working for transformation in the culture. And that's what the social teachings are all about.
Right. This is true. Yeah, no, most definitely. I think that, the counterculture right now, I mean, like the mainstream culture right now is filled with a lot of things that we would arguably say they're not Catholic. But,
100%.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that, actually, I want to quickly do a quick segue into Nefarious, actually. So,
sure.
Let's not do any spoilers for the people that haven't seen it, but talking about it vaguely, how movies like Nefarious are very crucial for the culture. Because I mean, when I went to see it, I didn't I expected that there was going to be some, I mean, I'm sure everybody's seen the viral clip of the guy that's being possessed, how he's he talks about the abortion and how humans used to do child sacrifice, way back as well. So I kind of expected it to be a pretty political, a huge political statement, also, on regarding morality as well. So that was kind of how I went into the movie going it. But when I went to the movie theater and I saw everybody there, I could definitely tell that like one could argue a lot of those people probably had no idea what they were going to be getting themselves into. So what do you think? Like I know you went to see I know you did a movie review actually on Nefarious. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I was really blown away by that movie. So the guy that put the movie out, his name's Steve Dace, and he's an Iowa guy. He's got a podcast. That's how I heard about it, was listening to his podcast. And so I'm familiar with his take on things. And when I went to see the movie, I kind of knew what I was getting into, but I was blown away by the boldness with which it confronts the things in the culture. And we often have this idea that things are just spiraling out of control just in a random way. But what we need to recognize, and this is what Nefarious helps us to understand, is that the things that are happening in our culture that are consistent with the culture of death versus the culture of life, these aren't just random accidents. This is part of the plan of the devil to destroy us. You know, the Bible tells us that our adversary prowls around like a lion looking for someone to devour. And we need not be ignorant of his schemes, the Bible also tells us. So what we have to do is recognize that when the culture is going evil in that direction, it's not just this random sort of falling away. It's very much planned and it's very much intentional by the enemy to deceive us. And because the church has become lulled and because Christians have become lulled into this paralysis because we're so addicted to our comfort and we're so addicted to our own bubble. And oftentimes what that turns into is, well, as long as it doesn't affect me in my life, then whatever people want to do is fine. But what we've seen is that that's a lie. That's a farce. What starts as that slippery slope thing is it becomes a downhill speed jump is faster than you can imagine. Because what happens is once you crack the door to evil, the evil one is never content just to be partially into your life. He wants to come all the way in and destroy you. The devil is not trying to get you just to sin a little bit. He's trying to destroy your soul. So if you think you can compromise with evil just a little bit, just a small amount, you're messing with fire, because he's going to barrel his way into your life. The moment that you give him the slightest bit of daylight, he's going to come in and overwhelm you. And that's really, this movie shines a light on how that's happened to an individual in the movie, but also to a greater context to the world.
Yeah, this is so true. Yeah, no, literally. I know nowadays, right, with at least with Republicans, I mean, like they're a lot of the conservatives nowadays, conservative and Republican aren't necessarily intertwined, but I would say that a lot of Republicans obviously tend to be conservatives, and these Republicans, like, you know, for example, the issue of gay marriage, for example, right? It's like this issue was something that like maybe even Obama wasn't for like a couple of years back, right? But now you see Republicans and they're conceding and they're conceding on these things. So like you look at this and it's like, you know, these Republicans are like the old school liberals of back in the day, and you kind of see how more and more like our politics of the country are starting to shift more and more to something that is not of God. And it's like, and of course, you know, people are like, okay, well, does it really matter about, you know, gay marriage or whatever, you know, they'll just let them marry, whatever. And that's exactly what you're talking about, that, you know, when you give an ounce to like even a little bit of this sin, right? Something that is not natural, right? It's just literally being like, okay, yeah, the state recognize, like the country, our leaders recognizing that two men can become a married couple. That's when you start letting in more and more of that slippery slope. It's a snowball effect that will keep on getting bigger and bigger. Which is why it's always so important to be able to be solidly grounded and have a solid foundation on what you believe. I mean, nowadays, like a lot of people, they're kind of like, oh, everything's subjective, you know, it's like, oh, don't be so strict, you're so uptight and whatever, right? All of that, from what I've seen in my life, all of that is very much looked down upon. And even I've been guilty of this before, right? But kind of like the way I see it, it's kind of like if, and I don't mean strict as in like, you know, losing your mind over any little mistake, right? I don't mean like that would be just like, I don't know, that would just be over the top, right? But I mean strict as in being like, okay, you have solid morals, you have a solid foundation, you have a solid way of thinking, a solid way of life, and you will do your best to stick by that. If you happen to screw up or whatever, it's like, okay, yeah, like don't beat yourself up over it, and then just get back on the road. That's pretty much it, right? You don't have to dramatize it. But I think a lot of these people, a lot of these people have had a really bad experience with people that are so-called strict that might go too far with it, and then they have like a really just total opposite reaction of just like, oh no, everything's strict, anything of that sort. Right, it's just kind of like, like really, why you got to be such a uptight person or whatever. But the fact is that if you're strict on your morals, if you're strict on the respect you give to another person, if you're strict on love, right, that means that you have something that you're worth fighting for. At least that's how I see it. Because it's like, if you have nothing that you are bold on, nothing that you're like, no, this is correct, then you're not really, then any good that you're fighting for is essentially kind of just has a very weak backbone, because you're not willing to stand your ground on what you believe is good and what you acknowledge to be good as revealed by God. At least that's how I see it.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. It all starts in our human hearts. When this is like you mentioned, the whole Republican thing or whatever. I mean, this is why it's so difficult to, when you hear politicians that say, well, I want to separate my personal beliefs from my political beliefs. That doesn't work, because no one is going to be able to be better than what their own personal beliefs are, right? So if your personal belief is that, let's say, for example, the issue of life beginning at conception, if that's your personal belief, then and you're willing to go against that in a public policy, then that's really not your personal belief. Your personal belief is that your public policy is more important. So what we have to recognize is we need to see our Catholic understanding and our teaching, our beliefs, those have to be the center of everything. They have to inform how we do business. They have to inform how our relationships are. They have to inform how we govern. They have to inform everything about us. Otherwise, they're just put in that little box of what we do privately in our religious life. Meanwhile, the world explodes because the enemy is not playing by those rules. We've created this set of rules for ourselves that is, well, we'll keep our opinions to ourselves and we're not going to impose them on anybody else. But that's not a level playing field, because the enemy is certainly doing all he can to impose evil upon everyone, regardless of your own beliefs.
Exactly. No, it's kind of like looking at it in reality, right? It's like the objective reality. There's people sometimes go between. Some people think that there is some people believe and acknowledge that there is one reality with different perspectives, whereas some other people think that perspective is equivalent to reality.
For sure, yeah.
And so, but of course, I think anybody that can think of it hard enough or think of it easily enough, with common sense or just logic, is that, there's only one reality with different perspectives, essentially. And that's why it's like, if it doesn't matter if somebody doesn't believe in God, doesn't believe that the devil exists or whatever, the fact of the matter is that there are certain things where the devil is trying to get people to sin, where the devil is trying to corrupt certain things. It doesn't matter. Like if a lion is going to try to attack me and I'm like, well, and in my belief, I don't think the lion exists or whatever. It's like, that doesn't matter. The lion's still probably going to try to attack me or whatever, right? It's like the reality is what reality is. Doesn't matter if your perspective has a hard time matching reality. Reality is reality, and it's objective, essentially.
Nobody wants that anymore. I mean, and we have again. This is where I look at this, and I think this is a satanic effort, because we have elevated our own selves, not just to the point of thinking about what's best for us, right? Like it's no longer about, well, this is just what I think about me. Now we've objectified our own selves to the point and elevated ourselves above reality to now we demand that everyone sees things the way I see them. That's where you get this whole pronoun nonsense from, is where now my own perception of myself, whether it corresponds to reality or it doesn't, that has become the new reality, not just for me. See, again, this is what I was talking about earlier, Franco. It's like, it's not just, well, you can have your own opinion, leave me alone. I'll just, whatever you want to do is okay with you. Whatever I want to do is okay with me. That's not where we are anymore. Now we're in a place where if you don't acknowledge somebody else's perception, even if it's objectively untrue, then you have done violence against them, according to them. And there are all kinds of consequences that take place in this world if you refuse to bend the knee to the idol of self-perception.
Yeah, exactly. Also, I want to go back to the point where you're talking about, like that if you believe something and, what the public policy that you want to enact reflects against it. It's kind of like, it reminds me of the whole saying of like, well, I'm not going to let my religion influence my politics or whatever, which is such a contradictory statement, because it's like your politics, public policies, all that stuff, right? That's just that policy is how you want something to work, how you want a society to work, how you want your country to work, etc., right? Religion and public policy is going to be influenced by how you want the country to work, to operate. Religion is how you view the world to be, the reality of the world. So that's obviously going to influence how you want your country to act. Because if you recognize the evils of the world, the good of the world, what is good, what is evil, etc., right? What is good, what can impact somebody to be a better person or whatever, right? That's going to immediately impact how you want the laws in your country to work. I mean, that's why murder is illegal. That's why prostitution is illegal, well, at least maybe in most states at least. But unfortunately, that's starting to kind of lose strictness in the country. But that's why we have a lot of bad things that are illegal, because it's like, yeah, we laws compel moral behavior. That's the whole point of laws, right? And of course, it gets into gray areas like like how much should we be taxed and whatever, right? But that's all downstream from the main like the more urgent priority that are issues that are priority, like murder, like abortion, which are pretty much side by side, all the marriage, all of this stuff that really will shape the soul of the nation, essentially.
Well, the thing about it is this: questions about religion are, or I should say it like this: beliefs about religion are beliefs about facts. They're not opinions. Now, right. You might believe the wrong fact. Like, you might believe something to be a fact and it's not, but it's a different conversation. Some people say, well, that's your religion, that's just your opinion. No, it's not an opinion. It's a fact statement. It's a belief statement based on a factual thing. And what I mean is this: like, what kind of ice cream that I like to eat, that's an opinion. And there's no right or wrong with that. It's just my preference. Okay. But when I say Jesus Christ rose from the dead and taught XYZ, that's a statement about a factual thing. It either happened or it didn't happen. It's not an opinion. But we have allowed people to pigeonhole our religious ideas into the realm of opinion or personal preference, so that it can be therefore diminished into something that can't be thought of in an ultimate way. Exactly. So as a politician, which obviously I'm not, I have zero respect for any politician who tries to separate their religious opinions about facts from reality. Okay, and from their policies. If they're going to say, well, that's my religious view, but I'm not going to govern according to my religious view, then it doesn't make me think they're a bad politician. It makes me think they're bad at their religion. Because, what's more important, right? Your faith should be at the center of everything. So people are like, well, then are you trying to tell me that it should be illegal to, commit sin? I don't, like I said, I'm not a politician. But I tell you what, if I could vote for a Catholic, knowing that I was going to get a Catholic politician that was going to govern according to their Catholic faith, that'd be awesome. If I had two politicians that were in front of me, one was Catholic and one was something else, and I could know, well, that person believes in X because that's their religious view, that would be very helpful to me. And if you don't like that person's religious view, don't vote for him. Right. But we live in a society now where it doesn't even matter, especially when it comes to politics.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that and even with that, right? Because it's like, even when people say that they are like, oh, I'm a Christian or I'm a Catholic or whatever, right? So much of this has like, I mean, we look at Joe Biden, obviously we could tell that he's not a very good practicing Catholic, at least, you know, which we can judge from his support in abortion and all that stuff, right? Like he's clearly going in heretical views against the Catholic Church. So it's like, you can clearly see that even these people, right, they are, even though they say they're Catholic, they don't actually submit fully to the church. They might say they are, but like they really are not. And that's why I think that like it's also important to for Catholics in general, right? For us to be like, okay, what does our faith actually mean? What is Catholicism? Because I know there's a lot of people that are Catholic, and I've met quite a couple of them that say they're Catholic, but they still end up voting for politicians that support baby murder, pretty much. And it's like, oh yeah, well, and they try to make some excuse to be like, oh yeah, well, I mean, maybe like, I mean, Republicans don't keep their word or whatever, and like, etc., they're racist or whatever. It's like, but you gotta understand, that's really not like, you know, the most important things of our faith. Abortion is one of like the most urgent issues in the Catholic faith, because it's literally interfering against it. It's literally violating a human life. So I think we also need to do a really huge part in, like, you know, more and more Catholic voices in the culture, like, you know, like me and you, right, to keep on making more and more declarative statements of what the church actually teaches, right? You know, informed basis on like, okay, yeah, does the church teach that you can just, you know, pick and choose whatever you want, like a pro-choice Catholic, or do you actually have to be obedient to the church in everything it says, right? When it says abortion is wrong, you also have to be obedient to that teaching. When it says contraception is wrong, you also have to be obedient to that teaching. When it says you can only get married in the Catholic Church and that's a valid marriage, you have to obey that teaching, right? All of these things that the church espouses, these have to be things that we as Catholics have to be completely obedient towards. And really, when you see a bunch of these distortions of the Catholic faith and all that stuff, that's what they are. They're distortions because they're not true Catholicism. True Catholicism is established by what the magisterium teaches, papal decrees, ecumenical councils, the Bible. These are things that define what the Catholic Church teaches, not some person that claims to be Catholic and does not follow what the church teaches, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you should never look at where someone fails to live up to what their religion is and then judge the religion by that. That's that person's problem. You know, that's their issue. And the thing I love about Catholicism is that its truth claims are so bold that it doesn't leave you room in the areas where it has definitively revealed the word of God to us. You don't get to just be like, oh, okay, well, I'm Catholic, but I'm also going to be, you know, pro-choice or whatever. You know, and I know that there are people that say, no, that's not true. Well, come on, man. You know, you have to be honest about it. You have to be real about it. You've got to obey the teachings of the church. But again, people even within the church will do whatever they have to do at times to try to promote their own opinion and their own preference and their own worldview against the church, while still claiming to be. I never understood that before I was Catholic, and I still don't understand it right now. If you're not going to follow what the church teaches, then why even be Catholic? Go be something else.
Yeah, pretty much. You know, yeah. Why protest the church? Why be Catholic and protest the church? You might as well be.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of other, you know, denominations or whatever that you could go join that would be totally okay with your opinions and preferences. Why do you need to stay in the Catholic Church if that's what you want to do? Because obviously you don't believe in the authority. If you did, then you would submit yourself to those positions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what Christianity is. You know, Jesus didn't take votes with his disciples to figure out what people wanted or how things should be or what was better for this person or that person. He just declared what the truth was. And when people fought against it, he didn't chase them down. He didn't fight with them. He just said, look, this is what's true. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. And I think that's something that we need to be keeping our eyes on.
Yeah, exactly. No, very true, very true. And I actually want to segue this into of course, you are an Protestant pastor. So I do want to talk about like I want to talk about like, I have a couple of Protestant friends, right, that are still, like they're battling with Catholicism, and they kind of just like the teachings, they can't find much biblical support for it. But I just thought it'd be a good idea to just know, because I know you were a very, very devoted Protestant. And so I just want to know, like, what are some biblical passages that convinced you of the Catholic faith, or that at least helped you kind of like point you more and more towards it, at least?
Well, I think the biggest one would be Matthew 16, verses, I think 17 through 19, where Jesus has this conversation with the disciples, and he says, "Who do men say that I am?" And they give all these different answers, and Jesus says, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter gives that famous response, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus says to Peter, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, flesh and blood have not revealed this to you. And I tell you, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loose in heaven. I give you the keys to the kingdom," right? So that's the foundation of the papacy, which to me, everything stands or falls on that view. Because if the papacy is not true, then Roman Catholicism is not true. If the papacy is true, then Roman Catholicism is true. You can't be the kind of person, and I tried to be this for a while when it was starting to make sense to me. Oh, well, I can believe in the authority of the Pope and all that stuff, but I don't need to be a Catholic. Well, no, if you recognize that authority, then that's what you need to be. So those verses in Matthew, and I know people want to argue about those verses all the time. People say, "Oh, well, Peter's not the rock, Jesus is the rock." Well, people can argue all they want, but here's what I say about it, and I'm not the only one who says this. Is the rock Peter? Is the rock Peter's statement? Okay, yes, it is both, right? The foundation is the statement of faith that Peter makes, but it's Peter himself, right? That's why Jesus changes his name. He doesn't just say, "I'm going to build my church on what you just said." He says, "I'm going to build my church on you." So much so that he changes his name to Rock. I mean, I don't know how much more clear Jesus can make that. So to me, that's a very important verse. The other verses that were pretty instrumental, where Jesus is talking about the Eucharist and eating his flesh and blood in John chapter 6, where he says, "Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. For my flesh is true food and my blood is true drink." That's pretty important. I mean, there's so many things. And I also, there's a verse in Jude, I'll read it to you, Jude 1:3. He writes, "Beloved, although I was very eager to write to you about our common salvation, I found it necessary to write appealing to you to contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints." And that was huge for me, because I wanted to know what was the faith that was delivered to the saints by Jesus. And was that faith, that ancient faith, the same faith that I was professing 2,000 years later as an evangelical Protestant? Because what I was seeing in my life was all of this departure from that faith. So I began to first recognize that there was a faith that was passed down. It wasn't just something that we get to create ourselves. It wasn't just this, well, I have the Bible and the Holy Spirit, I'm going to go off and figure out what God speaks to me and create my own version of Christianity. No, there was a faith that was passed down to the disciples, to the saints. And that ancient faith is the Catholic faith. That's what I was after. So just having that realization led me on this wild goose chase to be looking for that. And once I started looking, it wasn't long before I realized that the claims of the Catholic Church and the history of the church revealed that that's just what happened. Now, it took me a while to be able to actually go through with it, because it was going to be a pretty big deal for me to quit my career and lose all my income and become a Catholic. But once I was over my own self and ready to truly follow Christ, then I had no choice but to do that. So those are some of the biggest ones, I would say.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah. Real quick, I just want to add for the Peter, like Peter, you are rock, and on this rock I shall establish my church. That's actually like, I know a lot of some Protestants want to like say that, the Greek is Petros or whatever, right? But there's actually more probability. There's a lot of videos on this. Just search. I think that a good way to see if like somebody is like at least a good way to test if you have genuine faith, I would say, is try to debunk your own claims. Like, try hard to debunk your own claims, because if they really are true, then they probably won't be able to get debunked. No, they won't be able to get debunked, right? But if they are, right, then that means that, there's more truth that you probably haven't searched in. And I always recommend people to, like, with these Bible verses, when they talk about the Greek and whatever, right? Some people might just hear somebody on Instagram or YouTube just say something about like, oh no, but the Greek was like this, and then they'll just take their word for it, and then they won't like question further, right? They'll be like, oh yeah, that was it. Okay, yeah, they answered it, whatever, right? But they won't question it further. They won't be like, okay, well, maybe what if Jesus was speaking in Aramaic, which is a more likely chance that he was, which in that case, the word for rock would have been practically the same essentially. And also, I mean, just logically, it's like, Petros and Petros, it's like, it just makes total sense that he's still talking about the same rock. So it's like rock, whether it's a little rock or a big mountain or whatever. There's a lot of YouTube videos about this. I mean, you can just search it up, really just dig to see if you can debunk your own claims. And if you see that they can't be debunked, then I guess you're right. But if you see that they can be debunked, follow, just humbly look for the truth, right? Don't be ego invested into any of these arguments, but humbly look for what is actually the objective truth about, what Jesus really meant in those passages and stuff like that. But yeah, are any other biblical passages you got in mind, or were those like the main ones?
Well, I mean, there's so many we could talk about. I think about what started happening to me was I would begin to take all the objections that I had to the church, and then I would begin to be challenged by Catholic friends with scripture on those issues, things about like once saved, always saved, or how are you justified by a belief in Jesus only, or by belief and obedience, things like that.
Right.
And, of course, you've got Philippians 2:12 that says, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. You've got James 2:24 that says, man is justified by works and not by faith alone. I mean, there's so many things. Romans 2:6 says, for he will render to every man according to his works. And I know people always have all of their stock responses. Oh, well, it's talking about this, it's talking about that. But to me, when I stacked up all of the things in scripture with all of the things that I read in the fathers of the church and what the church teaches, it just began to make sense to me. I mean, that's the other part of it, is sometimes we downplay this idea that your faith should actually make some kind of logical sense. And when I think about that faith delivered to the saints, when I think about the traditions of the church being passed down, whether orally or by word of mouth, as Paul says to the Thessalonians, it just makes sense that there would be an authoritative structure that would go along with that church so that it would be able to teach authoritatively. You see Jesus in John 20:23 giving the authority to the disciples to forgive sins and to remit sins and to not remit sins, So you see all these things that when you look at it holistically, you step back and go, wow, the Catholic Church really, it's not just this superstitious pagan thing. It fits together with what makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. And that actually reminds me of this quote by Thomas Aquinas, which is like, to one who has faith, no explanation is necessary, and to one without faith, no explanation is possible. Yeah. And of course, I think a lot of us find ourselves in the middle ground of those two sides of the coin. But the logic part actually is a very good thing that you said, because I remember when I was thinking about converting to Catholicism, like a huge part of it was just the fact of the logic part of it. I would say just the one anchor point really is something that kind of like is just more and more vindicated, like what I believe now.
Yeah.
Because it's just like, I've and I know this might have like something to do, like I know this might not be a very popular issue with, especially in the American context, of our democracy and stuff like that, but that is something that it really put me into question about a lot about the faith, is the fact that Christianity, it's not really a democracy, it's a kingdom. And we do have a king, and that king, is Jesus Christ. And throughout time, right, how God, you can see this in the Old Testament, how God interacted with these other kingdoms, lesser kingdoms. They were kingdoms. They weren't like some democracy and stuff like that. It would always be like a monarch or some sort of ruler, like a one anchor point. And it just like, and you see this sort of structure of, so to say, government be used time and time again biblically, sometimes for bad purposes, sometimes for good purposes, etc. Right? And it's like, and you clearly see that when we have the papacy, right, the Pope, right, it's again one anchor point. And one thing that always got me to think about it is the part where I forget which chapter and verse this is. I should probably have that like on hand, but it's talking about where if your brother sins against you, bring two or three with you, etc. And like the final thing is that like, and if they refuse to listen, bring into the church. And if they won't even listen to the church, treat them as a pagan or a tax collector, right? And it's like right there you see that Jesus is establishing the church as the final authority, right? So the church, literally the church. So that's where we get into the question of, okay, well, what is the church? And I can see Christians going either two ways. One way is, first off, let me establish this. Obviously, the church, as any Christian that is well-versed in theology, the church is the body of believers, right? The body of Christ, the body of believers, right? All of us that are baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? So that is the church. But how does the church decide on matters? Is it by a collective, by a consensus, like a majority consensus? Or is it by some sort of structure of a monarchy-like structure like the papacy, right? One with hierarchy. Or is everybody's voice like on the same equal authority? Right. And I think that's kind of where we get, I think that's where I think a lot of Protestants, even well-meaning Protestants, can kind of have like a very, very hard time grasping the papacy, because it's like, to them, right, they're like, well, no, like I don't want I cannot find it in my heart for some Christians' authority to be higher than somebody else's authority. But as we can see, kind of like hierarchy and order is very much very, very necessary for the human species. And God did design us this way. That's why we always have a president or some sort of like, former one leader, stuff like that. That's just how we are meant to be led and meant to lead. So we can either see, so that's why it kind of gets me back to the logic part. It's like, okay, well, is democracy really a better idea than a one anchor point system, or is a one anchor point system better than everybody has the same authority and like, the decisions are kind of made by the majority consensus, right? In my head, what I've seen through most of my life is that the majority is oftentimes wrong. And even the Bible talks about this, right? Like most of the world will go through the wide gates, right? Most people, not many will, like minority of the world will go through the narrow path. So right there, it's explicitly telling you that, yeah, the majority is clearly not going to be in the right for salvation. So it's like, if you have all, and I can also bring up the point where, when Pontius is telling the crowd of Jews if they should if he should crucify Jesus or the criminal, right? The criminal who did all the bad things and stuff like that. It's like the majority choose Jesus, right? So it's like there's a lot of moments where you see the majority clearly not opting for the objectively better option. And again, you see this in the United States, you see this in the world and all that stuff. It's like, when has the popular vote ever been the correct one? I mean, sure, there are exceptions, of course. I think there are moments where the popular vote does, like, the majority can be correct, but only in certain situations. Like, maybe when it's a select few congregation, like per se the cardinals, the college that elects the Pope, which is a very, very small minority of Catholics that decide on the Pope by majority vote. That's not the entire church. That's just a very, very select few people. So it's like clearly, like this idea of total democracy and stuff like that. I can definitely see how that can get a lot of well-meaning Christians to kind of be like, well, I don't know, maybe I might kind of be a little cold-hearted, but I guess logically, that's kind of how I came to it. Like logically, it just kind of makes more sense to me. And I know that some people can say that's a little bit subjective, but I don't know. I think that once you start centering it on a one anchor point, that's already one. That's pretty objective, I would say. But yeah, what do you think?
No, that makes sense to me. I mean, you see that in the way that the church made decisions in the very beginning. If you look at the first chapter of Acts, when the Jesus is ascended into heaven, what's the first thing that they do? They come together and elect a successor to Judas. And they make that decision. They didn't take a vote. They cast lots, but they made the decision they needed to do that. Peter said, we have to do this, right? That's literally what happened. And then in Acts 15 with the Jerusalem Council, they had to figure out what they were going to do about these Gentile converts. They got together, the apostles. They made the decision with the authority that Christ had given to them. And then what did they do? They sent out letters to the other Christian communities with their decision and said, this is what we've decided. This is the rule. They didn't go, well, this is what we're doing over here. You guys get to do what you want, and you guys can have a different expression, and you can do it your way. This is just what we're doing here in Jerusalem. No, they decided, and then they sent that out. I mean, the authority is very clear. Jesus gives the disciples the mission and mandate of the church to go into the world and preach what he preached, to administer the sacraments and bring people into discipleship. And he gave them the authority to go do those things that he had been doing. That was their mandate. And that's what it still continues to be.
Exactly right. Yeah, very true, very true. But I wanted to touch on the logic part because I think that also has a lot to. I mean, God did gift us natural reasoning, which is and like for example, like a little kid can arrive to the conclusion of God, based on natural reasoning, like that. He did instill that within us. Let's see what people put in the chat if they have put many things in the chat. Yeah, the one person is asking about the SSPX. Personally, I don't feel very too knowledgeable to talk on that issue. Keith, I think that you're on the same boat as me, or would you want to touch on something?
I what I will say about this, I'm not claiming to be an expert on the SSPX. Mm-hmm. And I don't really want to be honest with you. It's not the kind of thing where I go, I need to figure out what the deal is with the SSPX. It doesn't really affect me personally so much because I attend a diocesan Latin Mass and we love that. I'm not someone who I don't think that I would go to the SSPX, but I'm also not going to say that I know definitively exactly what's going on there. Because I'm sure somebody a lot smarter than me would argue with me differently about it. But I've heard the debates, I've heard the arguments presented from both sides, and I haven't been persuaded that the SSPX are that Pope Francis is like, yep, you guys are all good. We're in good shape here. Go do your thing, and that it's just as good as going to any other church under the authority of the bishop. So for me, I'm not comfortable with it. But I'm also not going to cast judgment upon everybody who does because, I'm not an expert on that, and I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm also in the same boat. I will say this on my side, though, that from what I've heard is that like they used to be excommunicated, but then I believe Benedict lifted that excommunication and so I know that for sure.
For the bishops, not for Lefebvre himself, but the SSPX argues that his excommunication was not a valid or a just excommunication, therefore it doesn't exist. And this is where you get into the problem. This is why I sort of check out on this. Because,
all like the little all the little stuff.
Because to me it's just way more clear to be obedient to your bishop than it is to try to figure out why something was valid or invalid based on this or that particular thing. For me, that whole argument is way too subjective for me to feel comfortable just jumping into that. But at the same time, maybe there are things I don't know that would change my mind about that. Like I said, I have probably watched some of the same debates and some of the same videos that other people have watched on it, and I haven't been convinced by the SSPX that that's okay to do.
Right.
So that it's okay to like go to SSPX chapels instead of going to your diocesan stuff. But at the same time, I'm not here to pretend to be some expert who can definitively judge one way or the other on that. I just know for me, I'm always going to err on the side of obedience to my bishop, and that's just where I'm at.
Yeah, and that's really the Catholic stance, honestly, with anything. It's just obedience. That's like probably one of the biggest. I mean, obedience and humility go hand in hand. Obedience is probably one of the biggest cruxes of Catholicism that we always must
100%.
be. Right. That's one thing that like really differentiates us between every other religion, frankly. It's all like I like how Brian from Catholicism puts this, that the medieval grind set, whereas like you're only you don't know anything, you're just a peasant, you're just you go by what your priest says, what your bishop says and all that stuff, right? You're just obedient to them. You have no idea what the Pope is up to or whatever, right? But you just have faith, and you go by what your leaders say, pretty much, right? That's the medieval grind set, which I think is pretty good, because I think that like again, comes back to the democracy part. It's like do we really need a whole most people are busy taking care of their jobs, their families, the things that they have to do in their community. Not many people have the time and effort just the time in general to do all of those things, take care of their families, and be up to date with the latest, like, okay, what did that Pope actually mean by this, or what did the Pope do this, or what, like all this, like just little micro stuff that like, it'd be like, oh, it's scandalizing the church or whatever. Just tune out of the news. Focus on, how to best serve God and have faith. Focusing on how to serve God the best way you can is going to eventually you're eventually going to start to look less on more of people's faults and more on like how you can better yourself.
Yeah.
And of course, right, I'm not saying to ignore the sins of other people. Of course, like we have to point out sin and rebuke others when needed. But I don't know, to kind of like, I see this behavior a lot of Catholics online. And again, I'm not like going to talk specifically about the SPX, but just like in general, just a bunch of Catholics online that I see that a lot of them tend to really, really try to go off of this, just causing doubt in the Vatican, causing doubt in our Pope. And I'm not gonna lie, of course, I think the Pope, there are some things that I disagree with him on, when he talks about Trump's wall, and when he talks about like, just some other things with liberal economics or liberal geopolitics or whatever. Of course, I can disagree with him on those things because they're not matters of religious faith.
Right.
However, I do at the same time, I'm like, I think people go really far with it, and they're like, oh no, he's super liberal. He's like almost some people are even alluding that he might be the Antichrist or whatever, right? I see Catholics that are posting about this vision that some nun had where I don't know, like Benedict was killed or whatever. Yeah. And it's like, these things aren't even like confirmed or even approved by the Vatican, or like, and like I believe it even came from an anonymous account, if I'm not incorrect. Yeah. And it's like, and you see Catholics posting this online. It's like, what are the intentions there? Like, are you really like having the best intentions for our Holy Father and for the church? Or are you kind of wanting to go off of this kind of schizo, cause doubt in the church and stuff like that, scandalize believers, right? Because that's pretty grave. I'm not gonna lie. Like, maybe, I don't know if that's, scandal is a grave sin, actually. So there you go. But I always think that like we are really like, we just focus on serving God and really just humbling your heart. Because I don't think that like, I really don't think that trying to nitpick everything and like watching these sort of videos that cause doubt for believers is really healthy for our souls, like at all, honestly. But that's pretty much what I will say. If the SSPX happens to fall in line with that, then so be it. If they don't, then that's great. But I just want to address that because I've seen a lot of people that are non-SSPX or are SSPX, just a bunch of Catholics in general that do that, and which I don't think is okay at all.
I think, the truth is, I mean, I love the Latin Mass, and if the Pope came out tomorrow and said, "Hey, guess what? We figured it out. We're good. SSPX is all good," I'd be happy about that. Like, I'd be like, sweet, because I think I think the traditional Latin Mass is beautiful, and I'm very much opposed to efforts that are in place to try to restrict it or eradicate it or whatever. I mean, I've seen nothing but incredible beauty. I know people talk about like the toxic trads and all this kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that's not there. I know it is, but like in my world, it hasn't been that way. In my world, and I just met with a guy last night who was a complete anti-God atheist who it was the Latin Mass that actually like caused him to fall in love with Catholicism.
Let's go. That's
I know.
awesome.
And I was like, dude, like it's so beautiful and just holy to me. But again, we're in this polarization mindset where you're either all the way here or all the way there. And I reject that. But if the Pope were to come out and say, yep, okay, everybody's cool with SSPX, I'd be like, sweet. I wouldn't be like, oh man, those jerks. I want that to be part of our church in communion with, but I don't want it to be outside of the authority of the bishops,
Right.
So
you want to keep,
I want to know that
unity.
It's okay.
Yeah, you want unity, but you don't want to be disobedient.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not an expert on this, but I have not personally heard a compelling argument to convince me that it is okay. Maybe somebody's got one. I haven't heard it.
I heard from a friend of mine said recently that like apparently the Pope Francis did say that he specifically said they are not in schism. But I haven't fact checked that. Maybe it's true.
Yeah, I don't know about that. But here's the thing. Whether or not they're in schism, I'm the kind of person, Franco, that's like words matter to me. And they very well may not be in schism. Okay. But that doesn't necessarily change anything. It doesn't mean that they are under the authority of their bishop, right?
Right.
Because people want to fight over what does the word schism actually mean. In order to be a schismatic, there's all these definitions or there's all these things criteria that must be met for something to be technically in schism. Maybe it meets the definition. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe he said that. But what he didn't say was, hey, it's cool. Everybody go there if you want to. We're good with that.
This is true.
So whether or not that, to me, that's a side issue of whether or not they're technically in schism. I don't know that they are. I don't know that they aren't. Some people argue that they are 100% and they think they have those definitions down. Okay, maybe they're right. Some people argue, no. That's not what schism means. And if they were in schism, could they have been given faculties to hear confessions and do marriages? Well, that's a compelling argument to me. But at the same time, the Eastern Orthodox, we view their sacraments as valid too, but they're technically in schism. So all of that stuff to me is a smokescreen for whether or not they are under the authority of the magisterium of the church and their bishop and Pope Francis. And if they're not, or whoever the Pope is, right now it's Pope Francis. But I just mean to say, like, I don't mean like I'm not putting him up on a pedestal personally. Like it's up to him, But what I am saying is, whoever the Pope is, and I'm not questioning that he's the Pope. Don't get me wrong.
For sure.
What I am saying is that if they, whatever their status is, if they're not under, if the magisterium of the church has officially said that they're in some kind of irregular status and you shouldn't go to the chapels, then I'm not going to do that. And I haven't heard a compelling argument why I should.
Right.
So I don't know. We can move on. We've kind of beat that horse.
No, that's
to
fair.
death.
That's fair. I would say that's fair. I want to now with the Latin Mass. I actually so you go to the Latin Mass. You go there often. You
Almost
love
every
it.
week. I mean, that's my regular Mass. The only reason why I don't is if there's something, out of my control that's going on.
Gotcha. I like the Latin Mass as well. I personally go to my Novus Ordo, but I actually recently went to. Have you ever gone to an Eastern Mass,
No,
Eastern liturgy?
I haven't. There isn't any around me.
So my Novus Ordo, the one that I go to, they actually hosted a Eastern Mass, Eastern liturgy, Eastern Mass, on this last Sunday.
Okay.
And oh my gosh, it was so beautiful. I absolutely loved it.
Sometime.
I think I know Brian, same guy from Catholicism. He says he loves to go to as many liturgies as he can, right? He just loves to get all of them pretty much. But when I they have this thing where they dip the host in the wine.
Yeah, it's called intinction.
That intinction. Yeah, I don't know the word for that. So that stuff.
Well, I knew that because that's how we used to do it at the Methodist Church.
Oh, what the? Well, no way.
Oh yeah, that's a lot of Protestants use intinction. More Protestants probably do intinction than Catholics.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I do see that. Like yeah. I've seen a couple of that. Yeah. But I like that a lot. I'm not gonna lie. I really do like that. Because usually, I really something that I missed a lot when like I know, even though I wasn't a practicing Catholic when I was like a little kid and I still would go to mass with my parents, is that they would have the communion. They would do like the wafer and also the blood. The body and also the blood, right? And so now they don't really do the blood anymore. Like you're still getting it because it's still with the body, right? When you receive the host, but I don't know. I like I liked also drinking it as well, and I kind of just missed that. I was just like, oh, why did they stop that, right? But I know it still counts as body and blood when you accept the host.
Yeah.
However, when the priest dipped it in the wine and he gave us the Holy Communion, I really enjoyed it. I felt like this excite, and I don't know if this is maybe like my brain placebo effect or anything like that, but before taking in when we were lining up for the Eucharist, I felt this excitement that I just could not contain.
Wow.
I was just like, oh my gosh, I was just like super excited, and then like when I received it, right, I kind of like went by and see everything was calm, right. But then as I kind of just started like meditating on like what had just happened as when I received the Eucharist and like kind of replaying the action in my head, like I just got this sort of like, again, this excitement that I just I started like kind of, this sounds weird, but I kind of just started twitching and stuff.
I like it.
I was like sort of, I don't know if I should say that word, but just like I was just kind of like twitching because I just felt like this excitement that I just could not contain, and I was like, what is this? This is insane. And I was like, but I also was like, because I'm always critical of that sort of like feelsy stuff like that. I don't know, maybe I'm just like maybe I don't have a good past, but I don't know. I just kind of questioned. I was like, well, I might be a placebo effect or whatever, but every time I kept replaying the thought over again, I just kept on feeling that same feeling.
Wow,
right?
That's awesome.
And it lasted for until I eventually left, because I hung out after mass with a few friends and whatever, right? But it just lasted until then pretty much, and it was crazy. It was crazy. And so no, I definitely love the Easter Mass. It was I forgot what the name was, because I know there's several like the Melkite, the Maronite, all that stuff, right? I forget which one it was, but the priest actually was a priest that also hosts a Latin Mass, a diocesan Latin Mass as well.
Okay.
Like 20 minutes away from me. But yeah, no, it was amazing. I definitely recommend you go. Like I don't know, like I personally liked it a lot because there was like a lot of singing. There was a lot of, which I didn't know I would like, honestly. I thought I would like it more quiet, but me personally, I'm starting to realize that I think I like the more singing aspect of it, which they do in that liturgy. Which, funny enough, that mass, that style of the mass actually goes all the way back to when I believe St. Thomas went to India to evangelize and to bring the gospel. So that's how that mass that I went to was actually in some cases like way more ancient than like some of the masses that we have in the Roman Rite. So it was crazy. So I was like, dang, okay, I don't know, first time I was super excited. I recommend you go to one if they have ones. Like I know you said there's none near you, but
I travel a lot,
if you're ever in Virginia,
I'll get to one sometime
when
I'm traveling.
Yeah, no, there you go. But I just wanted to comment to that because I also thought like when I was I know in the Roman Rite, because most Catholics are in the Roman Rite, the Latin Rite. A lot of us actually don't really. I know there's a lot of us that don't actually know what the Eastern rites have. And that's what, honestly, when I was like when I used to be like very, very close to being Sedevacantist. I remember that I thought that like it was a war between like the Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo. Which I later realized was like, wait, hold on. There's more there's more types of liturgies than just those two, right? Mm-hmm. But also apart from that, there's a lot of, for example, like some Catholics might call Eastern Catholics, I don't know, maybe even schismatic or heretical, because the Eastern Catholics, they can have like married men can become priests in the Eastern rites, actually.
Well, those
are like some other stuff.
They wouldn't be considered schismatic or heretical because those aren't things that are doctrinally, those aren't dogma, That's a discipline. Married clergy can happen. I mean, that's that's not a dogma from the church. So the Eastern Rite churches definitely, I mean, they're in communion with the Bishop of Rome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, no, most definitely. But I know but the reason I mention that is because I know that, I think, again, Brian from Qatar, I know I've mentioned him a lot, but he's a cool guy. He's a cool guy. Brian, he one time he was texting in a group chat and he was talking about how like Eastern Catholics got like, you know, like a lot of these Eastern Catholics when they came to America, they got like really, really harassed by a lot of the Romans, Roman Catholics, because like, it was just like, they didn't know that all this stuff was also in communion with Rome. They're like, oh no, like, you know, all this stuff was the disciplines. They just like, they had never heard of it, right? And again, misunderstanding of what the church teaches and stuff like that. So yeah, no, I think that it's very awesome. It's very good to like, I know I said it's like, you know, don't pay attention to the news, but I think that having a good like reading your catechism and like knowing that stuff about the faith, that's pretty good stuff too, right? And I believe the catechism does mention the rites. Do they?
I don't know. I'm sure it does.
It probably does. I mean, I would assume that it does, but yeah, no, definitely. The rites of the church are very, very interesting. I know the Roman rite is. I'm currently a Roman Catholic, but I know that I'm definitely considering becoming Eastern if God calls me to it. But because I really like the Eastern Mass, and I like you know, I know that the Eastern Catholics, they do like the full immersion with the baptism, which I know like it's still valid baptism if they do the pour in the water and stuff like that. That's how I got baptized. But I don't know, my heart kind of is just drawn to those things sort of, and I think that like I do admit that that's kind of like I know that I heard this Eastern Catholic priest talking about how like if you can't find reverence in a mass, right, in a style of the mass, that's not the fault of the mass, but it's more because of you. Like you couldn't find the reverence, and you had to go to it. So don't blame the mass, blame yourself, right? And I kind of like, and for me, it's kind of humbling because I remember when I was like on a super huge like, you know, and I do love the Latin Mass, but I used to be super like pretty antagonistic towards the Novus Ordo, and I realize now that that was pretty like arrogant to me to be like, oh yeah, no, the Novus Ordo is just, you know, it's not reverend or whatever. Like there was no way, you know, like I couldn't find reverence. But no, that was me. That was more of me not being able to find the reverence in something that is clearly something instituted by the Holy Spirit. It's a valid mass. You're receiving the Eucharist. This is this is reverent. So if I can't find the reverence in it, that's on me. That's not on the mass. So it's kind of like, you know, like it's kind of getting off of that victim mentality essentially.
Sure.
So yeah, no. So when I'm like, when I say that I'm drawn to the Eastern Mass and stuff like that, I by no means am I saying that the Roman Rite is lesser than the Eastern Rite or anything like that. I'm just saying that me personally, I personally find it a lot more easier for myself to find reverence in the Eastern Mass. That's because of my own weakness, not because the Roman Rite has flaws or anything like that. That's because of me. So not to get like, that's why I want to make that clear, like with anybody that might be thinking like, oh, you know, like maybe I want to go to a different mass or whatever, because like this mass is irreverent or whatever. It's like, no, that's on you. That's not really based on the mass, you know. Of course, unless, you know, like they're like doing some liturgical abuse or whatever, because then like anybody wouldn't find reverence in that because that's a liturgical abuse. But that's different than just being like style of the mass, pretty much, or a style or a different rite, pretty much. But yeah, just wanted to touch on that. Any commentary on that?
No, you said it, man. You said it.
Gotcha. Well, we've been on for an hour now. Are there any closing remarks that you'd like to say?
I just want to thank you it's just refreshing to me to talk to you and see someone your age that's so on fire for the faith. I mean, you're about the age of my sons, and you know, I'm just inspired by your devotion to the faith and your love of the Lord, and I just want to encourage you to keep going. Anybody who's watching, the most important thing you can do of all is to focus on what you need to do to be more holy. And don't get distracted by the garbage in the culture or the problems in the church or what somebody else is saying or doing that frustrates you. Let the Lord's grace flow in you to transform you and to make you a disciple of Jesus Christ and one of his holy children. And if that's your life's goal, that'll keep you plenty busy, that you won't have to worry about every little argument and opinion that everybody else has. And that'll keep you actually in a place of peace, because you know that the Spirit has given you that grace to do that. So it's with God's help, it's within your grasp. So I would just encourage everybody to do that. And thank you for taking time to watch this this video. And I appreciate you guys reaching out.
For sure. For sure. Thank you so much, Keith. And remember, God cannot work through you if you first are not trying to achieve holiness. So when you try to achieve holiness, God will keep on working through you.
Amen.
It's about those intentions, that heart. It's about the heart. All right. Well, anyways, thank you so much, Keith. Thank you so much for coming and joining. Everybody go follow Keith. His links will be down in the description. Go check out his content. Very amazing stuff. As you guys heard from the beginning of the video, he has a lot of great stuff, a lot of good stuff that he's putting out. So go ahead and support him. And we will be posting clips about this. So like you guys can share that with your friends if you guys don't want to, if you know your friends are not going to watch the entire video, you want to share like quick clips and whatnot. We'll be uploading those as well. But yeah, apart from that, help us out. Make sure to share those around and stuff like that. And thank you so much for coming to see us talk about the faith. Have a great day. God bless and stay holy. Bye-bye. Oh wait, I just realized I was looking at the camera, which is turned off. Oh, whatever. I'll keep all that.
That's okay. That's
all
funny.
Right. We're good.